we're at the cusp of something really big, a breaking open where, just like electric vehicles, distributed energy in general, having your own energy assets locally, whether that's at your home, at your place of business, at your community level, maybe, will become more and more desirable, more and more common, more and more cost effective.
Welcome to the Blue Ocean Solutions Podcast, where we dive into real conversations with business owners, innovators, and industry leaders reshaping the future of clean tech, construction, and the renewable energy sectors. I'm Kreel Hutchinson, your host. Our guest today is Amy Simpkins, the co-founder and CEO of MuGrid Analytics in the Denver, Colorado area. We'll discuss Amy's decade-long journey from aerospace engineer to building one of the most technically sophisticated microgrid analytics and controls company in the renewable energy industry. We get into the real challenges of scaling a deep tech startup past the seven-figure mark, including what happens when your engineering first culture collides with demands of structured growth, sales, and hiring. If you're a renewable energy developer, facility manager, clean tech operator, you're going to love this show because Amy pulls back the curtain on what actually happens when solar, battery, and EV charging stations share the same site but don't communicate, and what it's costing you in efficiency and revenue. It's an example of how rigorous systems engineering, the same discipline used in spacecraft, is now being applied to solve the most overlooked bottlenecks in distributed energy. Welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Thank you so much, Kreel. I'm excited to be here.
I was really excited to have you on the show too, because you bring such a unique perspective based on your background and also how you're operating inside the industry today. So for people, my audience who may not be familiar with you and your work, why don't you share a little bit of your background? How did you get to where you are today and kind of the origin story of developing the company?
Sure, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm an aerospace engineer by education. In some other parallel universe, I was one of those folks that was riding on Artemis 2 that just went around the moon. But during my aerospace journey, while I did work specifically in spacecraft world, manned, unmanned, Earth observing, and scientific and interplanetary even, I discovered a real love for systems engineering. And it's actually kind of funny, when I was in grad school, I took a course called systems engineering, and I felt like it was like the lamest, most obvious course that I'm like, what did we actually learn out of this? And in hindsight, now that I kind of have stepped into what formalized systems engineering is, a systematic way of thinking through the design process, including testing and verification to ensure that what you're doing is actually working. I want to go back and rewrite that course because it could have been so much better. But the through line of my whole career has been in systems engineering, in bringing multiple disparate parts together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And to me, that's really what systems engineering in general is about, and what doing multi-asset distributed energy work is about. I was very privileged about 10 years ago to transition away from my work in aerospace and into renewable and distributed energy, and more or less found a really great place that could use a lot of smart people and a lot of creative, innovative ideas to bring it forward. An industry really on the cusp of complete revolution from an electrical grid that was designed, 150 years ago and hasn't changed too much since that time, and trying to integrate all sorts of new technologies, but not just new technologies, but new processes and new concepts of operations into it. That really excited me.
Inside then that 10 years of being inside the industry, at what point did you decide to launch your own company to really offer your value proposition that you're doing today?
So it really was a connection to my business partner. My business partner was at the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is now National Lab of the Rockies. And he was telling me about what he was working on and the need for rigorous modeling in the design phase, in the preliminary phases that at the time, and so we're talking like early 20s, there was still a lot of, while solar was definitely like taking off and is a very well established, mature technology already, there was still a lot of attitude of like, well, we'll install some systems and then we'll see what they do. And both my business partner's background, which is integrated circuit design, and my professional background, which was spacecraft performance modeling, are so like modeling heavy. Like in both of those fields, you can't just try it. You can't just send something out there and try it out. Like you have to be certain that it works before it launches into space. You have to be certain that an integrated circuit will work before it goes to the foundry. And so we both brought this very similar perspective that like early system validation, early performance validation was really key to cutting down costs. And that was an industry at the time and still today, it's an industry wide issue that capital costs are so high. How do we trim this down so that we can see more expansion of distributed energy? And one of the ways you can do that is with really good, really rigorous modeling. And there's a lot of nuance into what makes really good, rigorous modeling. And so at the time, I was definitely looking to stretch my entrepreneurial wings. And I came together with my business partner and said, I think you have a business here, actually. And I think we could do this. And the rest is history.
I love it. Hey, what does systems engineering mean in the context of microgrid or distributed energy projects? And why do you think it's so underapplied in the industry?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Think that what systems engineering means in the context of microgrids, in the context of distributed energy, that you've got a lot of different pieces that need to play together. And in the case of distributed energy, you're often bringing those pieces together in a new way almost every time. Every building is slightly different in its configuration. Interconnections to the utility have certain standards, but they vary as well. Every building might be looking at a different combination of technology they want to install, whether that's solar, wind, batteries, fuel-based generation. And a lot of people want to see those things work together and they see the end vision. They see the end vision of like, I see how this all can work together for the benefit of my site to provide energy to my site, which is what I need. But I don't, but then the how does that all come together? And I think our industry has done a really great job of marketing, of saying that this is possible. All of this is possible. And it is, by the laws of physics, this is possible, but it requires thought and a lot of nuanced design in order to be able to get it all to work together in the way that you think it should. And we're still, even though solar by itself and wind too are relatively mature technologies in and of themselves, the bringing together of a whole system that works together with a site, with the facility, a building is still a pretty new discipline. And so we get a lot of clients who focus on the technology, who focus on what kind of solar panel and is it bifacial and what kind of battery and how is it containerized. And the hard part of the project isn't in the individual technologies. The hard part of the project is getting it all to come together. And so that's what the systems engineering part means to me. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that a really important part of systems engineering that most humans don't like is test and verification. That before we leave it, we have to make sure that it works. And that might sound very simple and straightforward, but if you think about yourself and the way you do things as humans, we don't necessarily like to test things out. We like to assume that we did it right the first time and it's correct by construction. But in real life, in reality, especially as the complexity goes up, that is less and less the case. And it's so important to go back and verify, to go back and look at it, to monitor performance. And that time spent is never wasted.
I love this conversation so far because I'm really starting to see the aerospace engineer applying all of that sophisticated foundational understanding that that's just the way it's going to happen when it comes to space travel or probably even the military and stuff within that. Moving over to the renewable space and you and your business partner saying, oh my goodness, they're not verifying what's going on, but they're so creative, and the idea of like, maybe let's just build it and see what happens kind of perspective starts to pop out. So you've identified there's a missing element here. Your value proposition of what you guys do clearly answers that. So how has growing the business, wearing that entrepreneurial hat, getting into the business and saying, hey, this is where we come, this is where the gap that we're going to fill. How has the response been in the marketplace? And do client conversations, do they start to prioritize being, you're right, this is a place that we should put more emphasis before, making these down the funnel kind of decisions? What's been that process and feeling experience for you launching the business and really getting into the marketplace?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. There is a bifurcation between clients. There are the clients who have never done this before and don't really know what they're getting into. They probably read some articles and distributed energy sounds super cool. And then there's the people who have done this before and they probably have, in the gentle way of saying it, some lessons learned. In the less gentle way, maybe some scar tissue. And so the difference between those two types of clients, in the former case of someone who hasn't done it before but kind of knows vaguely what's possible, there is a lot of like, why would we need you? Don't you just drop solar panels and a battery onto a concrete pad and then they work? And it really, our most valuable clients and our most trusting clients are those who have been through something. They did their first pilot project or they were intimately involved in someone else's project and they've seen the challenges. And they've seen the challenges of interfacing and integration of multiple types of equipment. They've seen promises made in marketing materials by a variety of, controllers or software that's going to solve it all and make your life easier, and then watched as they did not perform. And so, yeah, our most faithful clients and the way that we built, especially in the early years of the business, has been to basically show up, to be faithful for our clients, to tell the truth. That's one of the really big like company values, that we tell the truth even when it's hard. Like we try to raise issues when it seems too complicated, when it's not going to work like you think it is. And then also try to be honest about when we can do it better, how we could do it better. And that is better, in my opinion, in the long run than marketing speak that tries to sell on just creating an emotional response in people. And so, yeah, I think especially in the early days, that trusted partner, trusted relationship was super important. And it was very much part of who we are as a company and how we show up in the marketplace. And it's hard to do it that way. It's a long road of building relationship because trust is not an overnight thing. Trust is not earned overnight. Our company has been bootstrapped and it was actually very consistent with that approach that, we weren't scaling right away. We weren't jumping into the deep end of how to sell a bunch of stuff right away. It really was all about relationship building, trust, authenticity, and doing really, really good engineering work. We're at the point now where we start to expand and we say like, okay, well, how do we match this very high priority of authenticity and integrity to a wider and more distanced marketing and sales strategy? And that's a question.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So, because it gives the audience and myself an insight on the ethics and the ecosystem of culture that you have that have built the company up. What I have noticed speaking to a lot of owners and operators is that there's certain skills or there's a certain rhythm that gets a person to a certain plateau, but then to get to from that plateau to the next, usually the business shifts in a certain way. So, what do you think was the main driver that got you to seven figures? And what do you think the main driver will get you from seven figures to multiple seven figures? How do those two look different?
Yeah, I do think that the journey to seven figures was possible to do in a very tight, startup-y, small, scrappy team, like everything you think of when you think of like startups. It started out with two kids in their basement. It's just like, the story of like Apple starting in a garage. Like, yes, same kind of story. And I do think it's possible to get there. Well, obviously, we're living proof that it is possible to get there from that type of start, that type of culture in the company. And I think the difference in moving toward a multiple seven figures and in scaling further, especially by like, you're talking about orders of magnitude, right? And I think the stickiest piece is an internal issue of getting more people, of growing the capacity of the company through personnel to fulfill, to support those kinds of numbers. And necessarily, I just said, we talked about our, relationship building. It's all about the people. It's all about the personalities. And how do you, when you're such a personality focused corporate culture, where, everyone kind of everyone knows everyone really well, and everyone, frankly, has some very strong similarities in the way we view the world and the way we approach our work. And we all are able to wear a lot of hats. While we do have some roles, we also cover a lot for each other that, like, we're capable of stepping in for each other. And so there's a lot of overlap. No one is like the software developer or the salesperson. Like, everyone is in the mix. And I think that it has been great for growing the company to where we are. And I think that has been the key. Like, our people, our wonderful team has been the key. And now, if we were to grow by orders of magnitude, we need support and we need capacity. And what happens to that culture, how much of that company culture gets kept, and what needs to fade away necessarily in order to support that kind of expansion. And that's the kind of thing that, like, is not necessarily my area of expertise. Like, I'm an engineer by education. I can talk to you about systems engineering and probably technical project management until we're blue in the face. But once we start to talk about like company culture and that kind of human side of running a business, I'm still learning a lot about that.
Well, we live in this fascinating time where really in the last, I would say 18 months, AI has really moved into all of our workspaces in some kind of fashion and into the world and the global conversation, of course. And speaking to a lot of business owners, they are now looking towards like AI implementation first before adding headcount and really trying to support their people or their culture to embrace the technology so they become more productive, they have more efficiency, and they can actually like scale with a leaner team rather than this option just wasn't available even like 3 years ago. You really had to like keep adding headcount. Is that something that you guys are actively in the conversation of, or what does your AI adoption and ethos around that look like?
That's a great question. I think that we are right at the beginning, we are necessarily as a whole culture right at the beginning of what generative AI can do, how to use it, what LLMs can do, within to assist anyone doing anything, and we are still I personally, as an individual, I'm still in a moment of like, oh, I could have asked AI for help with that. Like, we've started asking for a lot of help around like planning vacations and like travel trips and like putting itineraries together and stuff like that. Yeah, like it's helpful to get, that cuts down on the time involved. So from a corporate perspective, like, yes, we are starting to use AI tools. I will give the disclaimer. I think that it's really important to keep centering humans. And I think the way that you described it is perfect. That AI assists, AI helps and provides structure for the humans that are doing the real work. How can AI make it easier for humans? I am a very strong proponent in my work, definitely, but also in any kind of innovative work in general, that humans are always going to be the best. Like innovation is a uniquely human function, and humans must be centered. And so then the question becomes how? How do we use AI to support human innovative process so that human brains are more free to do the creative work that is their calling to do, and less of that, like the ticky tack everyday things. I would say that as a company, we don't yet have a specific like AI strategy. There's not a guidance. It's still, I would say, a playground, a sandbox where, we're using AI a lot to help us with form documentation and things like that, which has been very helpful and definitely has cut down on a lot of employee time doing reporting. We can take words that we have previously written and put them around new data for a new project so that reporting time is cut down, but it still sounds like our voice. It's not an AI written report. It's AI taking our words and reconfiguring them for a new area. I certainly think that there's vast capability here to explore. Might be slightly an old fuddy-duddy and, am cautious about this new technology and like, let's be careful. Let's monitor our ethics. Do we still feel that this is in line with like what we should be doing? But I don't deny that like AI is here to stay and that it's a very powerful tool for being able to scale without adding headcount or adding less headcount than you would normally have.
Yes, I think that engineer mind of needing to verify just to make sure everything is as it seems is probably a wise application when it comes to the hallucinations that AI can have and how it can play out. As you look forward into the future here, what are some of the trends that you feel are happening right now that your engineer and the consultation work that you guys bring into the industry will be able to really support or take advantage of or you're riding in because with the changing sector all the time in the solar coaster and in renewables, there's things moving in all different kind of directions. If you look towards the future here and looking to like grow your business, what are those trends that you're really seeing that, hey, this is going to work to our advantage and we can really support people in this area?
Well, what a great question. And the biggest thing I think is the grid growth, the load growth that we're seeing out there from a variety of reasons. And it actually dovetails into the previous question about AI. I mean, the expansion of AI and data centers and the computing power that's required to supply those very powerful tools is significant. And as we, as a culture, continue to adopt it, we're going to see load growth on the grid. We're also seeing load growth on the grid in a lot of different ways. People have been transitioning to electric vehicles, and this is something that I certainly don't think should be, a political or a ideological switch. Like driving electric vehicles is just straight up cheaper. Like just a great deal, like no matter how you slice it, and they're super fun to drive. And don't let anyone tell you differently that you need to have the purr of an engine. They are super fun. But now in the current political environment, we have some instability again in the Middle East. We're seeing gas prices start to go up, due to geopolitics and that. And that's just not gas that gets put in your car or gets put in your vehicles. That's natural gas and other petroleum products that are running our grid. They're running peaker plants. They're running heating in homes. And so I think we are at the cusp. Even before this whole geopolitical crisis that's going on, we've seen utilities that normally escalate their rates at 3 or 4% a year announce 7 or 8% increases just in one year, last year. Like it was already happening that prices were driving up in a supply and demand problem. And now we're facing a potential fuel crisis due to geopolitics. And I think we're at the cusp of something really big, a breaking open where just like electric vehicles, distributed energy in general, having your own energy assets locally, whether that's at your home, at your place of business, at your community level, maybe will become more and more desirable, more and more common, more and more cost effective as we see this shift that the macro grid, big, gargantuan, centralized energy system that we've grown up with starts to falter with these new requirements. So again, I don't think that's ideological, although I'm certainly a big fan of clean, zero emission energy. I think it's also just smart business and smart governance to look at distributed energy. I'm excited for that pivot because in the past, there have been lots of like government subsidies. There have been lots of funding programs, grant funding programs. And, we've participated in a lot of deployment programs that have been grant funded. And I do see this global economic turn that I think is going to drive everything like into the future and require less subsidy, require less external funding, and stand on its own 2 feet.
I would agree with you. It's one of the picking out themes within that answer, and something that other podcast guests have talked about has been this idea of decentralized energy security, right? Whereas in the past, it would have been cool to save money on solar, right? You make a long-term investment and you can save. But now it's more of this like, actually, what does energy security look like? Because we're in a vulnerable position and we don't have control of that. So decentralizing and then energy security as a priority of why to invest today so that I actually feel comfortable in the future, even if it costs me more today. I think we all know that, the price of energy is not going down. It's going to continue to go up, and geopolitical events like we're experiencing today drive that conversation. As you look then towards a future like that, who would be ideal customers or clients of your that you would like to work with and have conversations around? Share that. I'd love to see the inside of like your inside baseball on what those types of conversations or client profiles look like.
Uh, Um, well, I think first there's an interesting shift also in the players in the space. Before we get to clients, the energy industry, I'll just say the energy industry in general, and that should encompass both centralized and decentralized energy, is full of some 800-pound gorillas that have existed for a really long time. Very large corporate, Fortune 500, multinationals, and I think that the shift into distribution favors smaller, more localized business with local expertise, with on the ground relationships, and less of this like arm's length, faceless corporate kind of idea. And obviously that excites me. And I think that's right. I think that is the architecture of the system itself is supported by a transition into a more distributed architecture in the service providers. So that I think is interesting. I also think there is a really interesting interplay in terms of clients. I think we definitely are seeing, individual property owners, property managers which is also an interesting thing in the current environment as we see a lot of like real estate consolidation into private equity. At the same time, we're seeing a distribution in energy. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic. But we're also seeing a lot of action at the community level. And previous energy regulation doesn't necessarily support like a neighborhood or a small town coming together and saying, we'd like to do energy together and we'd like to do it differently. There are some regulatory roadblocks to doing that. But in certain pockets of the US, we're starting to see those restrictions break a little bit. And so there are ideas of, already we have communities that own their own municipal utility. And now the municipal utility is saying, what would be advantageous for our community? A large solar plus storage um, installation, and let's not just sell it back to the T&D. Let's make it resilient so that we can throw a switch and island ourselves if we need to. So yeah, I think that communities are huge drivers and are going to be huge client bases. And then I also think that like while we've had kind of in the past, distributed energy has had a little bit of a hobbyist feel to it, individual homeowners thinking it's cool and putting stuff on their own homes. We're definitely seeing the shift into commercial and industrial so that it's good business. It's not hobby. It's a good business decision for from both the economic perspective and like you were saying, the resilience perspective, the self-sufficiency perspective, the resistance to disruption perspective. And the final thing I'll say, coming back to the interplay, is that, we still see from the centralized grid perspective that there are a lot of these, large players who have done it the way they've always done it. And many of the utilities are trying to figure out, how do we support distributed energy? How do we play in this game? How do we make it a win-win situation? And I think it's going to be interesting in the next 10 years to see how that plays out with utilities and what role they end up playing, specifically the big utilities, right, that are more invested in a centralized architecture than a distributed architecture.
Interesting. As you then look towards maybe the next 6-12 months for you and your company, what's your strategic priorities?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time for us, actually. I guess I can announce here that we were formally awarded a big government grant with the National Energy Technology Lab yesterday.
Hey,
It was,
congratulations.
thank you. It was in
Yeah.
process for a very long time. And yesterday it's official and we can officially talk about it. And, there's definitely still, as I talked about, the shift into standing on its own in terms of business case, there still is a lot of support. Even in the current political environment, there's still a lot of support for distributed energy, particularly energy storage, particularly long duration energy storage, and the controls required to make that work and make it truly beneficial and make it a win-win situation for all the stakeholders involved. And so the next 6 to 12 months, we have a really good position and to look toward the future and say, okay, from where we are now and from the place that we have built, how do we get to that next level? Like we were talking about. And so I think while sometimes, especially when you start in like a consulting environment, you're very much living like hand to mouth. Even if it's a good hand to mouth, like you're still like, you have to go out and get the next contract to support. And creating a little bit of cushion, a little bit of stability for us is creating this, hey, wow, our event horizon just went out. Like, let's really think strategically about what we want the next year to look like.
Amazing. Well, congratulations. That's exciting news. As we move towards the completion of this conversation, I want to make sure people are able to follow you in your work. Where's the best place for people to do that?
If you like what I have to say, I love talking about technology, innovation, systems engineering, and distributed energy. I'm on LinkedIn as Amy L. Simpkins. And then if you want to learn more about what MuGrid is doing in the world and maybe engage with us on this like very sophisticated system architecture to make sure you get the most bang for your buck out of your system, you can check us out at.
Thank you so much, Amy. Of course, I'll put all of those links in the show notes. To our audience, if you've enjoyed the conversation, make sure to like, subscribe, share this with somebody that might be interested in knowing about the services that Amy and her team provide. Thank you so much, Amy, for being on the show. I wish you guys the greatest success moving forward in 2026 and into 2027. To our audience, thank you so much for being here. This wraps up another episode of Blue Ocean Solutions Podcast. Take care.